The year was 2169, and humanity had claimed the stars. Earth, once the cradle of civilization, now served as the political heart of an interstellar federation. But for all its technological achievements and military might, humanity was still an outsider in the grand scheme of the galaxy. As the Federation expanded, it encountered species of unimaginable power, some of whom looked at humanity with disdain, while others, with curiosity. Few, if any, took humanity's claim on the cosmos seriously. Captain Samara Steele sat alone in the command chair of the Vigilance, staring out at the cold expanse of space. Her ship, a sleek, advanced war vessel, cut through the void as it had many times before. The stars stretched infinitely ahead, and for a brief moment, Samara felt small, just another speck in the endless sea of the universe. Her crew, a seasoned mix of officers, engineers, and soldiers, were a fine-tuned machine, capable of handling whatever threat the galaxy threw at them. But this time, there was something different. Samara could feel it, an unfamiliar tension in the air, a weight she couldn't quite shake off. It had been a quiet stretch in the outer colonies, nothing more than routine patrols and the occasional diplomatic mission. Yet the silence in the air felt unnatural. "Captain Steele, we've got something." Lieutenant Rowe's voice crackled through the comms, snapping her out of her thoughts. The young officer's voice was tight with urgency. Samara straightened, already knowing this wasn't going to be another routine mission. She hit the button to open the comm channel. "What's happening, Rowe?" "It's a signal, ma'am. Very faint. We're still trying to triangulate the source, but it's coming from deep within the Draklin expanse." Samara frowned. The Draklin expanse was a vast, uncharted region of space. The Federation had only begun to explore it a few years ago, and most of its data remained incomplete, shrouded in mystery. Dangerous. Unpredictable. "Put it on the screen," Samara ordered. The bridge lit up with the familiar, star-studded backdrop of the expanse. A black void, dotted with distant points of light. But in the center, a small, blinking red dot emerged, flashing like a beacon in the darkness. A signal, older than anything Samara had encountered before. It was a warning, or a call, she wasn't sure. The strange pulse echoed through the ship's systems, rattling the thin line of silence hanging in the air. "Can you get a translation?" Samara asked, her voice steady but curious. Rowe hesitated. "It's encrypted, ma'am. But the frequency, it matches something older, very old. It's almost like the Zenthari language." Samara's heart skipped a beat at the mention of the Zenthari. The Zenthari were a nightmare. An ancient alien race, their cruelty was as legendary as their advanced biological warfare. They were believed to have wiped out entire civilizations millennia ago, their fleets vanishing into the depths of space as quickly as they appeared. Most historians thought the Zenthari were a myth, a bogeyman of the galaxy's distant past. But if they were still out there... Samara rose from her chair, her movements sharp and controlled. "Get me the Federation on the line. Now." Minutes later, Admiral Corrin's face flickered on the holographic screen, his expression grim. "Captain Steele. What have you found?" "I'm not sure, sir," Samara said, her voice betraying no fear, but the weight of the unknown hung heavy in her words. "We've detected a signal, old, encrypted, and it's coming from the Draklin expanse. It could be a Zenthari message." Corrin's face tightened. "The Zenthari? But they've been gone for centuries. Their ships vanished long before our first deep space expeditions." "I know, sir," Samara replied. "But if it is them, we need to investigate. We can't afford to ignore it." "Agreed," Corrin said, nodding grimly. "You're to proceed immediately, Steele. I'll send backup." "Understood, sir." Samara cut him off, her mind already spinning with calculations. "We'll investigate. But this may be more than a signal. The Zenthari were known for their biological weapons. If they've returned, it's not a call for help. It's a threat." Corrin's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. There was no need for further words. They both knew the stakes. The Vigilance sailed deeper into the expanse, its crew working feverishly to analyze the signal's source. The data was fragmentary, scrambled, but there was no mistaking its origin. It was Zenthri technology, designed to last centuries in the cold void of space, and now it was active again. "Captain!" Lieutenant Rowe called from his station, his voice sharp. "We've triangulated the signal's source. It's coming from an uncharted planet, barely within the outer rim of the expanse." Samara stood at the front of the bridge, staring out at the view. A planet, surrounded by debris and asteroid fields. She could almost feel the weight of history pressing down on them. If the Zenthri were back, this wasn't just a discovery. This was a declaration of war. "Prepare for landing," she said, her voice colder than she intended. "And keep your eyes open. If this is what I think it is, we need to be ready for anything." As the Vigilance made its descent toward the planet, the crew could feel the tension rising. The surface of the planet was barren, scarred by what looked like ancient battlefields. There were no signs of life, no ships in orbit, no communications. "We're not alone," Samara muttered to herself, watching the barren landscape below. The silence was unnerving, like waiting for a predator to strike. Her voice came through the comms again, sharp and commanding. "All teams, report to landing stations. We're going in." The drop pods deployed from the belly of the ship, a perfect execution of military precision. As they descended toward the surface, Samara's mind raced. Was this a trap? Or was it something worse, something the galaxy had long forgotten? The ground shook as the pods hit the planet's surface. The soldiers, armed and ready, filed out into the desolate landscape. But what they saw made their blood run cold. Looming in the distance was a colossal structure, something ancient, something designed for war. The message had been clear. And now, Samara understood the true meaning of the Zenthri's return. "Welcome to the war, Captain Steele," she whispered, her voice a mixture of resolve and dread. The hunt had begun. And humanity had just made its most dangerous enemy aware of their presence. The planet was a silent sentinel, a ruin carved into the cosmos. The barren surface stretched out before Captain Samara Steele, the dust settling slowly around the landing pods. The wind howled through jagged rock formations, an eerie whistle that sent a shiver down her spine. She had expected some remnant of the Zenthri, but not this. Not a deathly quiet. It felt as though the planet itself was holding its breath. Samara surveyed the area through the viewport of her drop pod. Her team, consisting of her most trusted soldiers, stood ready for anything, their faces set in hardened expressions. Each of them had seen their share of battles, but none had faced anything like this. The Zenthri weren't just a species, they were an unstoppable force of nature. An idea so terrifying it turned the brightest minds into survivors, rather than conquerors. "We've landed," Samara said over the comms, her voice calm but urgent. "Get moving, and stay in formation. We don't know what's waiting for us." The soldiers quickly began disembarking, their boots crunching in the dust as they moved with precision. They were veterans, trained to handle any environment, any threat. But as they advanced across the desolate wasteland, Samara couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It wasn't just paranoia. It was a visceral instinct, honed from years of combat, telling her something was coming. They moved toward the dark shape in the distance, an enormous structure, its towering spires rising from the ground like the twisted bones of some long-dead beast. The surface was pocked with craters, burn marks, and strange carvings. The air around the building was thick, as though it were charged with a presence, a faint hum that made the hairs on the back of Samara's neck stand on end. "This is it," Samara said, her voice barely above a whisper. She didn't need to say more. Her team understood. This was the heart of whatever had brought the Zenthri to their doorstep. They approached cautiously, weapons drawn, eyes scanning every shadow, every corner. Suddenly, a low rumble shook the ground beneath them. The soldiers instinctively dropped to a knee, their weapons aimed at the sky. Samara's heart raced. It was too soon. They hadn't even breached the structure yet. The rumble grew louder, more insistent. Then, from the far side of the building, a massive shadow emerged. It was unlike anything Samara had ever seen, an enormous, insect-like creature, its exoskeleton a dark, glossy black, glinting under the planet's dying light. Its mandibles clicked ominously as it lumbered toward them, the ground trembling with each of its steps. "Contact!" one of the soldiers shouted, breaking the tense silence. "Take cover!" Samara didn't hesitate. Her voice was a roar through the comms. "Engage!" The soldiers opened fire in a synchronized volley, laser rounds cutting through the air toward the creature. But the shots seemed to barely scratch its armored hide. The beast charged, its massive claws swiping through the air like deadly scythes. One soldier didn't move fast enough. The creature's claws swept him aside like a ragdoll, sending him hurtling into the dust. "Medic!" another soldier screamed. Samara's eyes narrowed. This was no simple creature. This was a Zenthari weapon, biological, engineered for war. It wasn't just a monster. It was the first wave of their assault, a harbinger of the nightmare that was to come. She switched tactics instantly. "Fire on the legs! Aim for the joints!" The soldiers adjusted their aim, focusing on the creature's legs. The shots rang out in rapid succession, striking the creature in its vulnerable joints. It screeched, a guttural sound that made Samara's teeth grind. The creature stumbled, its massive body flailing in a desperate attempt to maintain balance. But it wasn't alone. More shadows emerged from the building, and Samara's stomach dropped as more of the insect-like creatures appeared, their eyes glowing with a sickly yellow hue. They were everywhere, emerging from hidden alcoves, climbing the walls, spilling from the entrance like an unstoppable wave. The soldiers were outnumbered. "Fall back!" Samara ordered. "We need to get to the structure, now!" The soldiers began retreating, firing as they ran, covering each other as they made their way to the entrance of the structure. The creatures followed, relentless and faster than any of them had anticipated. Samara glanced over her shoulder. The Vigilance was in orbit above, but the planet's atmospheric interference was too strong for a direct evacuation. She had to make it inside, where they could regroup and hopefully figure out a plan. But the closer they got, the more she realized that this place, this structure, wasn't just a Zenthari stronghold. It was a trap. "We've got movement inside!" Lieutenant Rose shouted, his voice tense. He was scanning the structure's interior through his portable device, but there was too much interference. "Push through!" Samara snapped. "Get inside, now!" The soldiers reached the door. It was enormous, its surface covered in strange alien symbols that seemed to shift and pulse with a life of their own. The door opened with a hiss, revealing a dark corridor leading deeper into the structure. Samara and her team poured inside, but the creatures weren't far behind. The door slammed shut behind them with a deafening thud. Breathing heavily, Samara surveyed the interior. The walls were smooth and metallic, the air stale, as though it hadn't been disturbed in centuries. The faint hum she had felt earlier grew louder as they moved deeper into the building. "This isn't just a military outpost," Samara murmured to herself. "This is their base of operations. This is where they've been hiding." Ro looked around, his face pale. "Captain, I don't like this. Something's wrong here. I'm not sure we're alone." Before Samara could respond, a low, mechanical voice echoed through the dark halls. It was distorted, as though coming from every direction at once. "Welcome, Captain Steele. We've been waiting for you." Samara froze. The voice was cold, detached, and unmistakably artificial. She had no idea what kind of technology could make such a sound, but she knew one thing for sure: the Zenthari were far more advanced, and far more dangerous, than anyone had anticipated. This wasn't just a war for survival. It was a war to prove humanity's place in the universe. And Samara was done waiting for the fight to come to them. She'd bring the war to the Zenthari, no matter the cost. The echo of the mechanical voice still lingered in the dimly lit corridors, reverberating through the cold metal walls. Samara Steele stood frozen, the pulse of fear she felt tightening in her chest replaced by a cold, seething determination. The Zenthari had been waiting for them. This wasn't just an ambush, it was a trap. But it was also the challenge she'd been expecting. The war had officially begun. Ro, get the team in position, Samara commanded, her voice steely, though inside, the weight of what they were up against pressed down hard. We move forward. Stay sharp. Lieutenant Ro nodded grimly, signaling to the squad. The soldiers flanked her as they advanced down the corridor, the faint hum of alien machinery growing louder with each step. The air was thick, humid, and carried the faint smell of something decaying, as though the Zentri had been here for a long time, unnoticed by the rest of the galaxy. But no more. Samara's mind raced as they moved deeper into the structure. There were too many unknowns here. Too many variables. And they were running out of time. She had to gather intel, disrupt their operations, and give humanity a chance to mount a proper defense. The Federation would need answers, and she was the only one who could get them. They reached an intersection. The corridor ahead seemed to widen, and the faint blue glow of a distant energy source flickered at the far end. Samara, Rose said, his voice low but urgent. There's something off about this place. I've never seen tech like this before. It's beyond anything we've encountered. I know, she replied, glancing around at the smooth walls, which pulsed with faint energy, responding to their presence. This is Zentri tech. Their whole civilization was built around biological and technological symbiosis. And it looks like they're still using it. Suddenly, the floor beneath them trembled, and the walls hummed to life, more intensely than before. The flickering energy at the end of the hall grew brighter. Something was charging, preparing for the next phase of whatever hell the Zentri had planned. Get down! Samara shouted as the ground shook violently. The ceiling above them cracked, and a massive hatch opened on the far wall, revealing a large chamber filled with pulsating, bioengineered weapons. These weren't ordinary soldiers. These were living weapons, twisted, grotesque creatures that seemed to blur the line between biology and machine. The Zentri had taken their horrors to a new level. These creatures were an evolution, a step beyond what Samara had imagined. They were designed not to fight for territory, but to break and crush the will of any species they encountered. Fire! Samara yelled, pulling her own weapon from its holster as she fired in quick succession. The soldiers responded in kind, unleashing a deadly barrage of gunfire. But the creatures didn't flinch. They absorbed the shots, their twisted forms shifting and adapting, regenerating even as they were struck. None of this is normal, Ro muttered, firing again. They shouldn't be able to adapt this fast. These things are. I know, Samara interrupted. She pressed a button on her wrist device, activating the ship's remote systems. The Vigilance was still orbiting the planet, but even with its advanced sensors, there was too much interference. Still, the data it was transmitting might provide a clue. The creatures advanced, their movements erratic and unpredictable. Samara's mind raced for a solution. These were not just enemies. They were experiments, iterations of an ancient, incomprehensible design. If humanity was going to stand a chance, they had to break the cycle. Grenades! Samara ordered, and her team quickly deployed explosive charges. The blasts tore through the creatures, sending them skittering back, but still they did not fall. I've got an idea, Samara said, her mind snapping into focus as the solution came to her. We're not dealing with just weapons here. These creatures are connected. There's a central control system behind them. Ro's eyes widened. You mean like a hive mind? Exactly. If we can disrupt their neural network, take out their core control, the rest of them will fall apart. But we need to reach the source. The squad continued to fight their way through the onslaught of creatures, now more determined than ever to get to the core. Samara's resolve burned brighter. If humanity was to survive, they needed to understand the enemy. And to do that, they had to go deeper, into the heart of this monstrous, living fortress. They moved quickly, dodging the remaining creatures, pushing toward the source of the power. As they advanced, Samara's thoughts turned to the Federation. They hadn't prepared for this. No one had. The Zentri were far beyond anything humanity had faced. Their ability to adapt, regenerate, and evolve in real time was terrifying. But Samara wasn't going to let that stop her. she would find a way to turn the tide. They reached a massive door at the end of the corridor, its surface shimmering with the same unnatural glow. Samara ordered her team to stand by as she approached the door. The air around her seemed to grow heavy, thick with the weight of the alien presence. "I'm going to hack into the system," Samara said, pulling out a small device that would interface with the Zentari's technology. "Stay on alert. If this is what I think it is, we'll need all the firepower we can get." The door slid open with a hiss, revealing a dark, cavernous chamber. At the center, a massive structure stood, half organic, half machine. The core of the Zentari's operation, their central intelligence system, where their entire fleet and biological weapons were controlled. It was connected to the building, to the creatures they had fought, and to the planet itself. It was a living, breathing organism. "This is it," Samara whispered. "The heart of the Zentari's weapon." Ro's voice cut through the silence. "We need to destroy it. Now." Samara nodded, her fingers flying over the interface. "I'm uploading a virus. It should sever the neural connection between the core and the creatures. That will destabilize their entire system." The virus started to upload, but the core reacted violently. Lights flickered. The ground shook. The chamber's walls began to close in, as though the structure itself was fighting back. "They're onto us," Ro warned. Samara's eyes narrowed. "We're not leaving without a fight." The chamber began to pulse, and a deep, resonant growl echoed from the core. The Zentari knew they were losing control. "This is where we make our stand," Samara muttered, her eyes locked on the heart of the enemy. And then, with a sharp, almost deafening cry, the core exploded in a burst of light and energy. The creatures around them convulsed, their forms twitching violently before collapsing to the ground. The war for survival had begun, but Samara Steele had already claimed the first victory for humanity. "Let's go," she said, her voice calm but determined. "The fight isn't over yet." The chamber's sudden explosion of light sent Samara Steele stumbling backward. The deafening roar reverberated through the walls of the Zentari stronghold, the ground shaking violently beneath her boots. For a moment the world spun, the air thick with the acrid scent of burning metal and ozone. She forced herself to focus, breathing in the familiar, comforting scent of the dust and sweat that clung to her uniform. The battle wasn't over, not by a long shot. The first victory was just a step. Samara glanced around at her team. Soldiers, bruised and battered but alive. Their weapons still clutched tightly in their hands, their eyes darting nervously toward the smoke and debris swirling in the wake of the explosion. Despite the chaos, they stood firm, waiting for orders. "Status report," Samara barked. Lieutenant Ro, his face pale but determined, came up beside her. "The virus worked, Captain. The core's neural network has collapsed. The creatures are down, and the entire system is in disarray. We've bought ourselves some time," Samara muttered, scanning the wreckage. "But we need to move fast. The Zentari will regroup. They're not just going to let us waltz out of here." Her team was already moving, setting up defensive positions around the ruined chamber. But Samara's thoughts raced ahead. There was more to this place than just the creatures. The Zentari hadn't built a stronghold like this just to house a biological weapon. The core, now rendered useless, was the key to understanding their plans. If they could crack it, they might be able to uncover what else the Zentari were planning, and how to stop it before it was too late. Ro tapped her on the shoulder, breaking her reverie. "Captain, we've got movement." He gestured to the far side of the chamber, where a section of the wall was slowly opening. From the shadows, figures emerged, Zentari soldiers, no longer in their terrifying biomutated form, but in their sleek combat suits, their weapons drawn. "They're coming for us," Ro said, a grim determination in his voice. "We don't have much time." Samara's instincts kicked in. She turned toward the rest of her team. "Prepare for another fight. We hold this position. No one gets through." As the soldiers fanned out, Samara felt the weight of what was at stake. The Federation had been blindsided by the Zentari's sudden resurgence. No one had expected such an organized, ruthless return. But now, Samara realized something far more chilling. This wasn't just an invasion. The Zenthri had a plan, one that spanned beyond the walls of this ruined stronghold. They've been waiting for something, Samara muttered, more to herself than to anyone else. And whatever it is, we need to stop it. The first wave of Zenthri soldiers came into view, their figures clad in dark, form-fitting armor that gleamed under the chamber's flickering lights. They moved with precision, a testament to their training and deadly efficiency. The soldiers opened fire, their shots slicing through the air, forcing Samara and her team to dive for cover. "Return fire!" Samara shouted, taking aim and unleashing a volley of her own. The air was thick with the sound of weapons discharging, the echoes reverberating in the chamber's walls. The Zenthri soldiers were relentless, but they were not invincible. Her team's shots were well placed, and soon, the first few Zenthri fell. But then came the sound that made Samara's heart drop, an unmistakable, low rumble from deeper within the structure. The ground beneath them trembled once more, and the walls around them began to shift. "What the hell is that?" Rose shouted, scanning the surroundings. The noise grew louder, more insistent. Then, the chamber's farthest wall exploded outward in a shower of debris. A massive, heavily armored Zenthri war machine emerged, its form towering over the soldiers. Its face was a mask of indifference, a cruel reflection of the merciless designs of its creators. This wasn't just a soldier. It was a war machine, a beast designed to crush everything in its path. Samara's breath caught in her throat. "Everyone, fall back! Now!" But it was too late. The war machine's cannon fired, the blast sending a shockwave that sent Samara and her team tumbling back. The soldiers quickly regrouped, but the massive Zenthri unit was gaining ground. Its weapons were unlike anything Samara had faced, each shot tearing through the walls, each step a death sentence for anyone in its path. "We're not going to outgun it," Rose said, his voice tight. "We need a plan, and fast." Samara's mind raced. She could feel the pressure of the situation mounting. There was no time to think. The Federation's future rested on her shoulders. If they didn't act now, this creature would be their end. "Ro, is there any way to access the core from here? Can we reprogram that war machine?" Ro glanced at his wrist device, his fingers flying across the keys as the machine rumbled closer. "There's a control terminal nearby. If I can get to it, I might be able to disrupt its systems. But it's heavily guarded." "Then we make a path," Samara said, her voice firm. "We don't have the luxury of time. We take down the guards and get you to that terminal." With a single nod, Rose sprinted toward the control panel, his path covered by the remaining soldiers. Samara fired once more at the advancing war machine, her shots ringing out, but they seemed almost pointless against the creature's imposing armor. The team moved quickly, using the debris as cover, while Ro made his way to the terminal. Samara kept her eyes on the war machine, willing herself to stay focused. The Zenthri machine had already caused too much damage. It couldn't be allowed to advance any further. "Ro, now!" Samara yelled, her voice cutting through the chaos. Ro reached the terminal and pressed his fingers to the keys. The machine hesitated, and then, for a moment, it paused, its systems flickering. "Got it!" Ro called out. "It's in lockdown mode. The machine's systems are offline." The Zenthri war machine froze, its weapons hanging uselessly by its sides. Samara wasted no time. She aimed her weapon and fired, the blast sending the machine's core into a fiery explosion. The chamber fell silent, save for the distant hum of Zenthri technology. Samara exhaled, her heart pounding in her chest. They had done it. They had taken down the war machine, disrupted the Zenthri's offensive. But this was only a small victory in a much larger war. Ro walked back to Samara, a grim smile on his face. "That was too close." Samara nodded, her eyes scanning the remains of the destroyed machine. "This is just the beginning. We've got the upper hand for now, but the Zenthri won't give up that easily. We need to return to the Federation, report our findings, and prepare for what's next." As her team regrouped, Samara couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. The Zenthri had shown their hand, but Samara knew one thing: humanity would fight, and it would fight to win. The Federation's future depended on it. Prepare for extraction, she ordered. We're leaving. But the war? The war is just beginning,